This conversation was recorded live on stage at the Festival of Dangerous Ideas, a festival co-presented by the Ethics Centre and the UNSW Centre for Ideas.
It's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker today, one of UNSW's most distinguished scientists, a chemist by training with a PhD from the University of Stuttgart. She's now a Scientia Professor, which is UNSW's special category of elite research professor, and she's co-director of the Centre for Advanced Macromolecular Design. She designs molecules, and then she makes them from scratch. Take that, Gary Meehan. She's a multi-award winner. She's a fellow of the Australian Academy of Science. Here to tell you why you should fight your nanoscale fear is Scientia Professor Martina Stenzel.
Thank you very much. Can I put some nanoparticles in your body? No? Somebody really brave there. Yeah? Today I really would like you to fight the fear of nanoparticles. A lot is written in the media recently. Nanoparticles in the sunscreen might end up in your bloodstream. Nanoparticles in tattoo ink goes into your brain. Maybe even nanoparticle in food goes into your organs. Dangerous, dangerous. So, to be honest, these tiny little nanoparticles can in fact be very dangerous, and they have been held as the new asbestos. I'm not arguing that. And there are a lot of dangerous nanoparticles in nature. For example, fictional books have been written about these really dangerous nanoparticles. There was, for example, a book by Will McCarthy, and he invented nanomachines, mycoras, and they took over the solar system, making humans flee overseas, or to outer space. So we hear many stories that one day nanoparticles will take over the world, self-replicate, and they're just there to do evil things. The fear of nanoparticles can be real, and nature's nanoparticles are in fact dangerous. For example, nanoparticles that are produced during a volcano eruption travel through the air and might invade your lungs, do long-term damages. Nanoparticles from sandstorms do a quite similar thing. They fly through the air and bring elements to you like silicon. But the most dangerous nanoparticles we have are viruses. So viruses have been around and they killed millions of people, and millions of people will continue to be killed by viruses. And we are really very much defenseless against them. So what is really a nanoparticle? So I want you to touch your hair. Just get one hair. And if you have one hair, you're touching 100 micrometer. Now you divide that by 1,000 and you have a nanoparticle. This is how small they are. You can't really see them anymore with your eyes. So, however, we somehow have learned to live with nanoparticles, and this is the really amazing thing. We sort of appreciate that some of them are really dangerous, and some of nanoparticles, like some viruses, can be very useful indeed. And Edward Jenner was the first person who really embraced this idea that sometimes viruses can be very useful. So what he did, actually, he injected the virus of the cowpox into a healthy human being, and with that, it protected the human beings by the smallpox virus. When Edward Jenner was around, 400,000 people per year died of smallpox. So it's an outrageous amount of people. But what Edward Jenner did was really a very outrageous idea as well, treating people with something that is a little bit dangerous to protect them from something that is even more dangerous. So at Edward Jenner's time, he was met with a lot of opposition because people could not believe that you can do something like that. So he had a very radical idea. But we see the result today. Smallpox do not exist anymore. So viruses are in fact dangerous to humans. There's no doubt about that. But let's look at these viruses and be fascinated by them. Viruses are really clever little nanoparticles. And if you would be a virus, you would be very pleased with yourself, because if you're a virus, you can circulate undetected through the body's defense mechanism, really like a ninja. You're not detected, you have stealth character. You can seek out your host, you can evade your host, you can do a lot of damages. It's really very fascinating what viruses can do, and let's learn from them and use them for our own good and make synthetic nanoparticles that just look the same, have the same properties, but they're not dangerous. And that's the most important thing. So the big important issue is why people are so scared of nanoparticles is that we don't know them and we think they're all the same. But in fact, we have so many different nanoparticles. We have nanoparticles that are bigger. We have nanoparticles that are really tiny, down to 10 nanometers. We have nanoparticles that hang around forever. We can have nanoparticles that fall apart later on. So some are very reactive and dangerous. Some are very useful and harmless. So we can clearly say, like humans, we have bad and good nanoparticles. And I would like to say we have 50 shades of nanoparticles. So nanoparticles can be really very useful in a lot of fields, from energy to medicine. And especially in the field of cancer treatment, nanoparticles really have made quite an impact. And the area of cancer treatment is really very dear to my heart because my very best friend, Sonia, she died when she was in her 20s of ovarian cancer. And so it really hit her quite suddenly. There were no warning signs. And so she had to struggle for 5 months with chemotherapy until she gave up the fight. It's a very devastating disease, and you're not expected to get sick from ovarian cancer when you're so young. So we have achieved a lot in the last 20 years when it comes to cancer treatment, but something like ovarian cancer is really a disease that hits you suddenly, and the survival rate is very low. So what we need now, we need radical new ideas. We need dangerous ideas, similar to what Edward Jenner did with his cowpox virus vaccination. So how does nanoparticles can help us? So the big problem with cancer treatment is that once drugs gets injected in your body, it circulates around the body everywhere. And because you find drugs everywhere, they can have devastating side effects. You might lose your hair, you might have liver or kidney damage. So now we take these drug molecules and we package them into nanoparticles. So we put them inside, and your nanoparticle becomes like a little nanoplastic bag, or really like a nano-Trojan horse. So now these nanoparticles circulate around your body, and they have a high affinity to the tumor. So now the concentration of drugs in the tumor can be enhanced. So nanoparticles can have a lot of other good advantages when it comes to cancer treatment. A lot of drugs actually are not very active. And so what we do is we're making these drugs more active by packaging them into little Trojan horses. So what you see on that slide here on the right side is an artificial tumor we grew in our lab. So it's actually a pancreatic tumor, and that pancreatic tumor keeps growing over 7 days. Now we give this pancreatic tumor some drugs. Nothing happens. The tumor keeps growing. So on the very right side, we put now these drugs into nanoparticles, and after a few days, the tumor is destroyed. And what you're seeing there are just a lot of dead cells. So these nanoparticles can actually have so many good side effects. We just really need to embrace the opportunity. And I'm not talking fully about future stuff here, because we already have nanoformulations on the market, but I think there's more that we can do by using nanoparticles for other diseases like cardiovascular diseases, hepatitis, and more. So I'm not scared of nanoparticles. I'm really embracing the opportunities nanoparticles provide. And I'm not scared of them the same way I'm not scared of nanotechnology, of nature, or anything. We know about the dangers, but we also learn to work with these dangers, and we embrace the opportunities. So in fiction, nanoparticles are not always the bad ones. For example, in the book by Aziz, we had a little manned nanorobot, and that manned nanorobot circulated around the bloodstream. and looked for the brain, for a little blood brain. It repaired the blood brain and then came out again. So this is quite an inspiration when nanoparticles can really take us. And that story is now 50 years old, but let's take it and run with this story and get inspired and see this is where we would like to go. The Asimov story, of course, used little human beings which were shrunk to nano size, but we don't really need that. We actually can make nanoparticles that are quite smart. And we are now going in the right direction to make so-called nanobots. And these nanobots can find the diseased site, it can repair the diseased site, and then maybe even report back and say, nano operation is done. So I'm really quite confident that once we really understand nanoparticles much better, we can really start and appreciate the opportunities they provide and embrace them as something great the future can offer. And maybe one day you might even be treated with some nanoparticles and they might help you. Thank you.
I really liked the adaptation of the Asimov movie Inner Space with Dennis Quaid and Meg Ryan when I was about 14. I'm not sure if it was the science that did that, but it's time, Hollywood. Seriously, 20 years without telling the same story twice, please. I always wanted to appear in a venue that looks like a Bond villain's lair, and today we get to do so. I'm thinking in particular of the island lair of Silva, played by Javier Bardem in Skyfall. I don't know if you remember, but his world domination plans were not nanobots and they weren't things to blow up the moon. They were computer programs. What's smaller than nano and much more scary? How about artificial intelligence? We've already heard a lot. I, in fact, opined in an earlier talk today about artificial intelligence not knowing anything at all about artificial intelligence. But here we have today somebody who does know about artificial intelligence. He works at the interface of AI and game theory. You might already have benefited from his research on algorithms that can help us make better decisions. Now, those are the kinds of algorithms that I certainly need. His work has won awards and seen him nominated as one of the top 10 rising stars in artificial intelligence. He's a world traveler with an undergraduate degree from Lahore University of Management Sciences, an MSc from Oxford University, and a PhD from Warwick. He has worked in Germany and France and the USA, and we're exceptionally lucky now to have him as a colleague at the University of New South Wales, where he is one of the new Scientia Research Fellows. Please join me in giving a warm Fodi welcome to Dr. Khandis Aziz.
So whenever artificial intelligence is mentioned in public discussion, the picture painted is either terrifyingly bleak or rather dreary. We see Armageddon-like visions of sleek black robots surpassing human intelligence and enslaving humankind. Or we are warned that machines are always eavesdropping on our conversations and they are watching our every move. But what I'd like to discuss today is very different. What if I told you that instead of taking away all that we value, artificial intelligence could contribute to social good and fairness? It's true. As an academic working in the field of multi-agent systems, I'm passionate about the possibility that AI or artificial intelligence could improve democracy rather than destroy it. It sounds idealistic and impossible, but AI is already contributing to social good. It is even saving lives. This is Abby Coleman. She lives in South Australia and loves the little yellow minion creatures. If you look very carefully, you can even find one on a windowsill. These weird little critters do not age or get sick, but Abby was born sick. She was born with the kidney disease, and by the time she was in her teens, she urgently and desperately needed a replacement kidney. Her dad, Doug, was willing to donate his healthy kidney to his daughter, but devastatingly, his kidney was not compatible with Abby's. Across the country, however, there was another family in a similar situation. The kidney exchange program in Australia identified a perfect solution. By analyzing intricate medical data, it found complete strangers across the country who could help each other. Abby's dad gave up his healthy kidney to a stranger across the country, and the stranger's loved one donated a life-saving kidney to Abby. With this exchange, 2 lives were saved. But with AI, we can save many more. We can use AI matching algorithms to find exchanges of organs at a large scale. These exchanges could involve multi-way swaps rather than pairwise exchanges. Even for the case of thousands of families, there are millions of combinations of independent multi-way swaps to save the maximum number of lives. For humans, it would take years to figure it out. AI algorithms can solve this problem in a matter of minutes. And in these matters, every minute counts. Kidney transplant is not the only scenario where AI can lead to social good. Another example that is close to my heart is that of refugees. I was born in the 1980s, and around that time, there was a huge crisis of refugees during the Soviet-Afghan War. There were crowds of people with no food, shelter, or education. In the past few years, the situation has hardly improved. In fact, since 2015, 65 million refugees have been forcibly displaced from their home cities and countries. Often these refugees lead perilous lives, not sure where they will eventually end up. And allocations of refugees is mostly done in a rather ad hoc manner. In reality, refugees have real preferences over available localities, both in terms of job prospects as well as family support. Localities can have priorities over refugees as well, both on base of skills as well as compatibility of language. We can use AI algorithms to identify allocations that take into account all this information as well as the budgetary constraints. The idea is not to ignore the agency of the refugees or the constraints or priorities of the localities. In fact, the goal is to do the opposite. AI algorithms can be designed to provide the maximum benefit to all. So if an immigration minister really insists on prioritizing leg-spinning bowlers, or maybe French au pairs, this kind of requirement can be built into the system. We tend to worry that AI and machine-based thinking will take the power away from the people. At a time when democracies around the world are in trouble and our major institutions are in strife, this is particularly scary. But AI can actually help us regain people power. A shining light in this regard is the participatory budgeting paradigm, which gives residents more control over what projects they want to fund in their suburbs, localities, and cities. This is Homes for Homeless in Paris. It was once a derelict building, and now it has been transformed into a center for refugees and migrants thanks to this program. And here's how the program works. Projects are proposed by the residents in Paris. Technology provides a digital platform to both help suggest and vote on these public projects, even if you're not politically connected and even if you're not mobile. By doing this, residents feel part of the local decision-making. At a time of increased disconnection, this new form of technology-supported democracy connects people to their local community. In Paris, people overwhelmingly voted for humanity. They help others and not just themselves. The paradigm of participatory budgeting can be further combined with the idea of liquid democracy. And what is liquid democracy? Well, if I'm not sure about particular issues, say concerning senior citizens, I can simply let my personal vote flow like liquid to someone who I trust, someone who I find wiser, someone like Mr. Miyagi from the Karate Kid movie. He would vote for the Senior Citizen Center and not Disneyland. The paradigm of liquid democracy is already being explored within some progressive parties in Germany. The idea is enticing because it flattens the political hierarchy and helps maintain a chain of trust. Artificial intelligence also offers some ideas that are even more radical, and they even freak me out. What if you could have your own personalized democracy bot, which mimics your previous choices and preferences? Someone like this guy. You don't have to do anything. Your bot will do it for you. It votes online for you on issues and takes these issues to your parliament. If you want, you could change and update your preferences as you age. For instance, your bot could be fighting for live music venues. Once you have a kid, the same democracy bot tries to shut them down. Now it starts agitating for cheaper and better child care. 20 years down the line, if you suddenly start buying Lycra and fancy bike gear, maybe it's going to start agitating for better bike lanes. Okay, so I have discussed ways for AI to occasionally help us bypass career politicians, to give the power back to us. Can we occasionally do the same thing with lawyers? It is said that a jury consists of 12 persons trying to figure out who has the more expensive lawyer. Indeed, hiring lawyers to settle protracted disputes and negotiations can be extremely expensive. It can cripple people, and that is not just. Interactive AI algorithms can identify fair outcomes that are acceptable to all the disputing parties. It can help in disputes around custody and property. There is work being done in this area, and it is very promising. I believe that AI could lead to better dispute resolution. We can program the fairness into the system, and by taking out the theatrics and the tricks, we could actually make a legal and mediation system much more equitable. And considering the legal fees nowadays, definitely cheaper as well. As we move to a new digital age, I hope we can harness the power of the internet, AI, and algorithms to make collective decisions that are fair and mutually beneficial. This includes whether we are making decisions about how to save kidney patients, how to select and fund the next public project, and how to give refugees a secure future. But these are just some examples. The possibilities are endless. We can program AI to destroy us or to help and bind us. The choice is ours.
I certainly know that my democracy bot will be voting for the development of that artificially intelligent lawyering. How good an idea is that? How many of you have heard of the Anthropocene? Yeah. Sorry, I just need to make you exercise at least once every 15 minutes. I just wanted to check. Nothing in particular. You know what it is, and you know that you're kind of already in it. One of the things about the Anthropocene is all the invasions. Australia's got amazing wildlife, and it's particularly successful at introducing wildlife from other parts of the world. If you want to know what is Australia's worst invasive pest, you might say the rabbit. You might say the cat. I know I certainly would say the cat. You might say the Xbox. Is that a pest? If you asked a conservationist in Northern Australia, they may well say the cane toad. Or if you asked a farmer down south, they could well say European starlings. Our next speaker has done the genetic research behind both of these invasions. She unravels the genetics of how pests succeed and spread. She has a PhD in conservation genetics from UNSW, and then she went to Deakin for several years on some prestigious research fellowships, including the hardest grant funding in Australia to win, the Australian Research Council's DECRA Fellowship. I'm thrilled now that we have enticed her to join UNSW permanently as a Scientia Research Fellow. Today she is here to talk about some new technologies that have the potential to deliver the weapons that we need to fight biological invasions and many animal-borne diseases. Should we fight with these weapons, or should we fear them? Here to help you find your way is Dr. Leanne Rollins.
Should we manipulate the genomes of other species? The truth is, humans have been actively shaping the genomes of other species for more than 10,000 years. We interbreed and selectively breed species, like our pet snoodles and the Granny Smith apples that we love to eat, and we don't think twice about it. Some of us eat genetically modified organisms, or GMOs, like canola or soy. But today, I want to talk about synthetic gene drive, which is a recent technology that has the ability to affect all of us. I'm not here to argue that this technology is a dangerous idea, but rather the way that we might use it is. When GMOs were first discovered, the dialogue was often centered around irrational fears. Let's be smarter about our approach to this technology, and instead of letting fear lead us, let's let reason guide our opinions. The synthetic gene drive story starts in 2014, when Kevin Esvelt and his colleagues at Harvard suggested the marriage of two phenomena that occur naturally but independently in nature. The first is selfish DNA, which are genes that bias their own inheritance by replicating copies of themselves across the genome. The second is CRISPR-Cas9, which is a precise gene editing tool. Together, these technologies form gene drive, which drives a gene throughout a population, and by extension, its associated characteristics, to spread to every individual in the population over a short number of generations. This is accomplished because when one parent carries the modified gene, it spreads it to all of its offspring, and they all carry 2 copies of this modified gene. Traditional genetic modifications in GMOs mostly were developed to help us improve agricultural production. These organisms are likely to be less fit in the wild, so in the event that they escape containment, they may not survive in the wild. In sharp contrast, gene drive is specifically designed to be released into wild populations. And because it copies itself within individuals, it actually eliminates variation, and it dodges natural selection. So even if an altered characteristic is disadvantageous to an organism, it can still be driven throughout a population. This is called a modification drive. It artificially drives evolution. There are also suppression drives, which can push a population to extinction, by example, by making all individuals a single sex. This concept has been demonstrated in the lab using organisms with short generation times like mosquitoes, so we know it works. Sounds kind of scary, right? Kevin Esvelt thinks so. He's recently admitted that his paper that came out in 2014 urging the use of this technology in the wild was a mistake before controls for this technology could be developed. And now he and others are working on these kinds of controls, things that will actually halt gene drives, or daisy drives, which are multi-component systems that are self-limiting, and then they'll eventually succumb to natural selection. These controls are vital to our ability to use gene drive safely. Although gene drive has not yet been released into wild populations, there are several large-scale research projects with this intention. Predator-free New Zealand aims to eradicate pests like possums in New Zealand by 2050, and they're considering the use of this technology. Target Malaria aims to release gene drive in mosquitoes in Africa by 2029. And G-Bird, in collaboration with CSIRO, plans to use gene drive to eliminate mice on islands in Australia and elsewhere. You may be wondering, why would we even consider the use of this technology? Well, if the technical difficulties surrounding the control of the technology can be surmounted, It has the ability to solve some of our greatest problems. For example, malaria kills a child every 2 minutes, and we spend $12 billion a year controlling it. Invasive species threaten biodiversity across the planet, and we spend hundreds of billions of dollars a year on these problems. And Gene Drive has the potential to solve these problems. There are substantial technical challenges that still need to be resolved before we can release this into the wild. But we also need to address a suite of risks before we can responsibly use this technology. One challenge is that all invasive species are native somewhere in the world, and they play important roles in their native ecosystems. Think of possums in New Zealand, for example, and invasive populations spreading tuberculosis to livestock, but at the same time being protected in Australia. So it's imperative that Gene Drive is adequately controlled. Accidental or intentional release back to the native range must not occur. I'm an invasion biologist. My job is to help produce the science that we use to control invasions. I know that unintentional releases regularly occur. Many introductions that plague us today are not the result of intentional releases, and in Australia, we know all too well the problems associated with invasion. Sometimes, even containment facilities fail to contain, such as in 1995 when CSIRO's containment facility on Wardang Island accidentally released the Khandis virus, and many of the rabbit populations on the mainland were infected. Rabbits are pests in Australia, so many people didn't care about this outcome. But this early, unintentional release meant that public engagement in this issue never happened. The point I want to make is that this incident happened because of a basic misunderstanding of the biology. Researchers operated under the assumption that Khandis virus was spread only by rabbit-to-rabbit contact, and so their facility was designed to prevent this. But as it turns out, flies act as vectors. This gap in knowledge led to the escape of Khandis virus, and we may have similar gaps in knowledge about Gene Drive. Perhaps the greatest hurdle in using this technology is to understand how removing or changing an organism will affect the ecosystem. Ecosystems are complex, and often impacts have chain reactions and are often unanticipated. Let's take cane toads, for example. Toads were introduced to Australia, as many of you know, to eat cane beetles in Queensland sugarcane fields, but instead they powered across Australia. And many native Australian predators are susceptible to toad toxin, and species such as goannas were devastated in their wake. However, goannas' native prey, such as children's pythons, tree snakes, turtle eggs, and crimson finch nestlings, have all benefited from fewer goannas. Toads are a food source for many species of birds who have learned to flip them over and eat the non-toxic body parts. As a result of toads' presence, black snakes have evolved to have smaller heads, and pythons have fewer tapeworms because toads act as a terminal host for that parasite. These are only a few examples of interactions that we know have occurred, and undoubtedly there have been hundreds more, all in less than 85 years. So now it's difficult to predict what would happen to this ecosystem if toads were removed. In addition to ecological issues, there are also political and security issues. Wild animals don't respect borders. What's good for one country might not be good for another. Clearly, Gene Drive has the ability to wreak havoc with biosecurity, which is why the US government is the primary funding body for this research worldwide. And this technology could be used to arm bioterrorists with the perfect weapon. A modified organism may look identical to one that isn't modified, and the release of a single individual into a native population could cause major damage. There are also ethical considerations. Do we have the right to eradicate a species for economic reasons? What about for human health gains? Some people would argue that we have a responsibility to take care of each other first, and I don't think many people would mourn the loss of the smallpox virus. I'm here today on behalf of the scientific community to urge you to engage with this issue, because gene drive can affect you too. Let's not fear gene drive, but given its potential impacts, we should all participate in the debate about whether we should use this technology and on what terms. If there's anything here that we should fear, it's complacency. Let's not look back on this as another missed opportunity for public engagement in an issue that has the ability to affect life on this planet. Thank you.
Fear complacency, that's absolutely spot on. With great power comes great responsibility. It's frustrating not to be able to get rid of those cats. Still, I thought all the cat people had left. Who is the scariest of them all? Who is the scariest person on social media? Don't say it. You're not allowed to say his name. Stephen told you not to. No, you shouldn't. He might puff up a little more. Well, maybe it isn't. Maybe it's the Kardashians. Courtney, Khloe, Kim, Kanye. I know, it all gets very blurry, doesn't it? But that whole selfie thing, Stephen warned us about that. I don't know that he takes too many selfies, but people take selfies with him. I'm delighted to introduce to you our last speaker, my valued collaborator, and one of the rising stars of Australian psychology. She does the difficult job of studying nature and nurture, and more difficult job of studying how they interact to create the most complex problems that societies face, the ones that involve sex and gender. She, like our other speakers, has won many awards, including the 2016 Australian Psychological Society Elaine Dignan Award for research benefiting women. She has a PhD from UNSW in psychology, studying sexualization, women's agency, and gendered aggression. In the last few years, she's been working in the biology department at UNSW, developing an evolutionary layer to the work that she does. She's developing new ways of studying behavior on social media, perhaps the most important new forum for human behavior. I'd like you all to welcome our final Fight the Fear speaker, Dr. Khandis Blake.
You know, back when I started my gender studies degree almost 15 years ago, the idea of standing here being about to tell you to relax about female sexualization really was not on the cards. You know, back then I just shaved my head. I was extolling the benefits of radical feminism, and I was the elected women's representative of my university, and that was women spelt W-O-M-Y-N, like herstory. Now, needless to say, I was really confident at that time that when it came to women's issues, that patriarchal social structures were the problem, and that manifestations of those problems, like you can see up here, were systematically oppressive and antagonistic to female interests. Now, when I began my graduate training in psychology some 10 years later, again looking at women's issues, I was again really confident that, you know, this was the kind of thing we needed to eradicate. I just spent the last 10 years working in female advocacy, running empowerment programs, working as a life coach for women. In short, I knew what I was talking about. And I have this distinct memory. I'm sitting in a workshop on evolutionary psychology a couple of months into my PhD. And, you know, I'm enthusiastic about being there. I'm more than a little skeptical, though, that evolution has anything new to offer me of my understanding of gender. And then the presenter starts talking about the ultimate and evolutionary reasons why we see sex differences in things like public status driving. He talks about the fitness costs and benefits of women's preoccupation with their physical appearance. He starts talking about the historic circumstances that have evolved over time and that lead us to see these cross-cultural consistencies in things like male-male alliances that exclude women. And I am sitting there and I am flabbergasted that I have not come across this before. You know, and in that moment, I really made two choices. The first was never to be blind to both sides of the debate. And the second was really to commit myself to figuring out how both nature and nurture could be used to shed light on women's issues. And, you know, I've learned a few things along the way. The first is that sexualisation is a strategy to get ahead, just like any other. Telling young women and young girls not to do it probably isn't going to work. And what's scary to me is actually how much we want to control what other women are doing with their bodies, not that sexualisation exists in the first place. Now, let's start with perhaps the most photographed woman in human history. You may have seen her before. What makes her a little different is she's done many of these photos herself. On a recent 4-day vacation to Mexico, it's rumoured she took 6,000 selfies. It's 1,500 selfies a day. Now, is this just a passive tool of the patriarchy? Someone who's commodifying their own body to suit the needs of men? That's what the dominant socio-cultural account would, use to explain this kind of sexualised behaviour. And I can get the commodification part. But the passive part, I've really got my doubts. You know, this is a very savvy businesswoman. She's worth $175 million. She has an app, she has a TV show, she has a book, she has a kids' clothing line, she has a makeup line that sold out within 3 hours of its debut. She is strategising and fulfilling on her own interests. And she may be commodifying herself, but she's outrageously benefiting from it. She's a better business person than her uber-successful husband, Kanye. She earns more than he does as well. Now, could the same be said for other young women who don't have their own TV show and who you may see standing there with a phone camera in one hand when you're going about your daily lives? You know, why do these women engage in this kind of sexy selfie behaviour? One of the things I do is I track people's behaviour using big social media data. I download millions of posts worldwide. Don't worry, nothing to do with Facebook or Cambridge Analytica, all ethical, I promise. But I use these kinds of data to test hypotheses about how women compete with other women and where things like sexy selfies happen most often. And the way that I do this is I use keywords and hashtags in the posts, and then I figure out which ones are sexy selfies. And then this algorithm I've developed will geolocate them to everywhere in the world so I can answer these kinds of questions. Now, I can tell you that across the 113 nations that I have data in so far, that sexy selfies actually have a lot more to do with living in an environment that is economically unequal than they have to do with living in an environment that systematically prioritises men's interests. Now, that may sound a little confusing, but consider this context. So a growing body of research in psychological science now tells us that income inequality stokes status anxiety. Doesn't matter where you sit on the social hierarchy, one of the things that income inequality will do is it will make you preoccupied with where you sit relative to others, and it will make you all want to climb the hierarchy. You could think of it like this: when you caught the ferry over to here and you saw all those beautiful houses along the waterway, income inequality is one of the things that's going to make you feel like, God, maybe you still have a fair way to go. Now, climbing that hierarchy of you're a young woman by attracting a well-off man, by becoming a queen bee of Instagram influencers you're in your own right, this can reap relatively large rewards. It can get you noticed, it can get you the envy of your fellow female competitors, it can even earn you cold hard cash. Now, this is happening inside of a certain culture, that's true, right? It's happening inside of a culture that we know commodifies women. But my point is that when we look at variation in the strength of patriarchal culture, economically, socially, politically, and when we look at variation in sexualisation, what we see is when we compare Sydney versus Melbourne, or if we compare the US versus Nigeria versus Indonesia, comparing countries and comparing cities, you don't see that patriarchal power and sexualisation co-vary at all. But what does predict sexualisation across all of these places is income inequality. So you may not like the amount of sexualization you see, you may not want it to be that way, it may make you feel uncomfortable. You know, sometimes it makes me feel uncomfortable. But when you see it, it doesn't mean that what you're seeing is garden variety oppression. Now, I also run experiments on people in the lab. I actually have them come into the lab and bring whatever their sexy clothes are, their makeup, their shoes, whatever it is for them. And I have a group of women who put this stuff on in the lab and, you know, get dressed up as if they were going to go out on a hot date. And then I have another group of women who are in a control condition, they just wear whatever they're wearing that day. And I use a series of mathematical techniques and psychological measures to figure out if looking sexy actually does affect how women feel and behave. And again, the dominant research in this area is going to tell you that sexualization is something that robs women of power. But when we did this work, what we see is that actually for the women who are sexualizing themselves and dressing up in all this stuff, when they do it and they feel like they're doing it well, they act with more assertiveness, not less. They have more positive mood. They act with more of what psychologists call agency. And this is really important because agency is one of those things that we use to describe the ability to actualize your own goals and fulfill on things that matter to you. Now, this doesn't mean there are no risks. I'm not saying we should all just tell women to put on more lipstick and not worry about the gender pay gap. We know that trying to cultivate your inner Kardashian is the source of a range of psychological maladies: eating disorders, depression, anxiety, sexual dysfunction, a complete reduced awareness of what is going on in your own body. All of these are serious. I'm not saying we should ignore them. But I think it's helpful to kind of consider this behaviour on a continuum. And on the one end, you've got wanting to look good, if you're a young woman, potentially even wanting to look hot, and wanting to show that you too can win and be competent at this game of sexual attractiveness. And then on the other end, you've got abnormal, narcissistic, body obsessive, nip and tuck style body modification. Now, sexualization isn't necessarily closer to this end. And when we assume that it is, one of the things that we do is we mischaracterize that in the female-female arms race, you've got to outdo your competitors. And this intensely competitive world of diets, yoga lattes, green smoothies, Botox, dermal fillers, waist shapers, this actually has a lot more to do with women competing with other women than it does with women living in an environment that oppresses their interests. Ultimately, I think it's too easy for morality and personal opinions to worm this way into this discussion. The truth is we live in a society where looking sexy can generate large returns, socially, politically, economically. And in an evolutionary sense, being able to maximise your place on the social hierarchy by using sexualisation, this can be adaptive, this can be quite rational. And this is why telling young women not to do it is not going to work. You know, telling a young woman not to post a sexy selfie, this is like telling her to avoid a pot of capital that youth bestows on her, when she knows and you know and I know that that value will diminish over time. So, you know, this, for me, this is not what you should be fearful of. I think what's really scary here is the biases that you hold and that I hold that stop us from being able to consider this for what it is, which is a competition just like any other. And the fact that it feels so natural for us and that we can be so entitled about what other women should do with their sexual behaviour, this is what should be keeping you up at night. Because even if we might be doing that for the right reason, protecting women, protecting children, protecting society, protecting men, one of the things we now know is that sexualisation can be an example of female agency. And history has shown that we are very well practiced at taking out our own biases on the women who are trying to get ahead. Thank you.
I know, but, no. She told you, you heard it. Now, get on social media and engage with whomever you disagree with, whether it's Khandis, or whether it's Leanne, or whether it's Harris, or whether it's Martina. Hopefully they've challenged even a little bit of your reflex, of the reflexive thinking that you may have. Maybe they've got you to think before you send your daughter back into the house and tell her to put something more modest on, or don't use that sunscreen, it's got nanoparticles in it, or don't lick that cane toad. Don't ever lick the cane toad, okay? You didn't even hear that here. I'd like you to once again give an enormous round of applause to Martina Stenzel, Harris Aziz, Leanne Rollins, and Khandis Blake.